What's going on, guys? Alex Zukin here from Mr. Build It. Welcome back to another week in the workshop. The topic of today's project is shutter style cabinets for a laundry room makeover. So without wasting time, let's get into the video.
Now, to get started with this project, I went down to my local Home Depot and I picked up a couple of sheets of the 4x8s in the red oak. The sheets are roughly about 49 bucks a piece. Now, they're so big to put on a table saw to actually run them safely and accurately. So what I like to do is break them down at least in halves. I use a track saw like you see here. It makes it super easy and, tear out free. But if you don't own a track saw, what you can always do is just clamp down like a piece of trim, like a 1x2, 1x3, and then use your skill saw, preferably with a nice high tooth count skill saw blade so you don't do, a whole bunch of tear outs, and then just cut it in half, and then you can start working on your table saw.
All right, little pro tip when working with cabinet grade finished hardwood veneer plywood. So in my situation, I'm working with a white oak. That stuff is super flaky on top if you're not careful. So 3 things that will help you have the crisp cut is, number 1, brand new blade, specifically something like a higher tooth count blade. So it doesn't have to be brand new, but at least a decent blade that has the high tooth count, 60 teeth, just fine. Number 2, go slow. Slower you go, the better it cuts, less tear outs happen. And number 3, one of my favorite tips when working with flaky stuff is lay down some painter's tape. Some the blue 3M, whatever, lay down on top, and if need be, lay down on the bottom, doesn't matter. But that will tremendously improve your ability to create a nice crisp cut without tearing out that expensive stuff.
The 2 pieces that I'm doing for the sides, they are 16 inches wide by 48 inches tall. The back piece is 15 1/4 inches by 48 inches tall. And then the top and bottom piece, they are 14.5 by 15 1/4.
So the method of mounting the cabinet on the wall, it's going to be a system called the French Cleat system. What I'm doing is taking an old scrap piece that we've cut off. Remember how I said oak chips away? So I placed down some 3M tape, any kind of tape as long as it has good contact. I ran it on my table saw at a 45-degree angle. The 45-degree angle created this. And so what's going to happen is this part is going to sit on the back of our cabinet in this kind of fashion. And this part is going to sit on the back of the wall in this kind of fashion. So what's going to happen is when the cabinets are ready to be mounted, all we're going to do is lift our, let's see if I can show this. We're going to lift our cabinet up and slide it right on top. And that's going to sit. Once it's sitting, I am then going to anchor in the base of the cabinet to the studs of the wall so it doesn't move anywhere.
In case you haven't noticed, but I'm using the same scrap piece of wood even when attaching the top and bottoms of the cabinet. It creates this perfect 3/4 inch spacer that allows for the 3/4 inch space inset on the back of the cabinet to kind of hide the French Cleat system perfectly, and then it creates a perfect inset at the bottom and the top. Well, in case you want to put crown molding on top, or in case you want to put lights at the bottom of your cabinet or on the top of your cabinet for like an accent. But it just speeds up the process. One of the best advice I've ever heard a woodworker say, it's not the ability to create a good, accurate cut, it's the ability to create a repeatable cut. And well, I think that system in theory applies to even glue-ups as well. And I laid down tape. Now, this is the trick that it took me forever to learn, maybe because I'm lazy or whatnot. But the frustrating part when working with a finishing grade plywood is that it tends to, well, every once in a while there's wood glue squeeze out, and you can never always get all of it out, and so sometimes when you stain you still see it. So a good habit I developed is when you put down the painter's tape on both sides of the seam, what's going to happen is when the glue does squeeze out, all you got to do is just take off that tape and voila, you just have a nice crisp clean corner that you just joined it together. All right, boys and girls, we're finally getting to the point where we're installing the so highly spoken of French Cleat system. 2 things that we'll say about it. Number 1, I like to make them a little bit wider, at least 3 to 4 inches in width. Just allows for me to have more surface area to drive some screws into the studs. Number 2, when it comes to mounting them, I like to put them to the very tippy top of the cabinet, basically flush with the top. Now, the reason I do that is it gives me a nice reference point, a nice measuring marker from which part to which part can I hang. Basically, when putting it on the wall. One of my favorite practices. Now, no cabinet, no professional grade cabinet is complete without the key element, and I believe that is the face frame. Now, if you don't know what a face frame of a cabinet is, essentially it's the part that sits between the cabinet door and the cabinet plywood carcass itself. It's the finishing touches. It's the part that creates this overall three-dimensional solid feel of the cabinet. And essentially what I did is I took the 1.5-inch oak that I bought at the Home Depot, and I cut the dimensions to 48 inches tall and 13 5/8 wide. Now, the way I'm joining them together, right, all it is a big fancy square or rectangle, is I'm using this fancy tool called the Festool Domino. And simply all that does is it creates mortise and tenon joinery in the fastest way possible. Now, don't be discouraged if you don't have this tool. You can use alternative methods, like you can use pocket holes, you can use just traditional mortise and tenons, you can even use sometimes biscuit joinery if they're small enough. Inspiration behind the cabinet doors is I wanted to create this kind of modern shutter style doors, and I took the 2.5-inch red oak, again, local Home Depot, and I cut 16 pieces. Now, this is where the repeatable cuts are important, so I just screwed in a little stop lock on my miter station and just made about 15 or 16 repeatable cuts. And then the side rails were 48 inches tall. Again, that's the theme of the day. Almost everything here is 48 inches tall. And what I did is I spaced them out evenly, 1/2 inch distance from each one another, and then I clamped it down. And then what I'm doing here is I'm marking them to make sure that top and bottom have this kind of lining up part where the mortise and tenon will go. Now I'm using again, the Festool Domino, and it has a nice little lining jig that I can line it up and go through that mark. But again, if you don't have this tool, you could always use the Craig jig. You can create pocket holes with it. You can create biscuit joints. In fact, I've done this kind of style using a biscuit joiner, and it worked just fine. So another key characteristic of a professional grade cabinet are the adjustable shelves. And so to create these perfectly spaced out and even pins for the shelves, I'm using this shelf pin jig from Craig Jig. Again, really handy tool. Now, I'll be honest with you, till this moment, most of the shelves I've ever built were always permanent. I just kind of knew what was going to go there. So this is the first time I've actually approached this concept. And I'm not going to lie to you, I feel really good. I feel like I've created this really solid piece of cabinetry that could be bought or could be built by somebody far more talented than myself. And this tool is super easy. You make your first anchoring point, and then you put in a pin, and then you just work your way up. Super handy, super easy to use. After laying out all of our pins for the shelves, we are now ready to install our face frame. Now the face frame, we are using wood glue, like always, and then clamping it in or securing it with the pocket holes. Now remember, like I said, it's important to create those pocket holes for the face frame on the inside parts of your cabinet plywood carcass. Once everything's clamped down, we're going to start the grunt work with the sanding. Now for the face frame, you can work your way up from 80 grit to 120 to 220 for your finishing. But for the veneer, for the rest of the cabinet, be mindful, there's not a lot of it there. So by you working your way up from 80 grit, you're probably going to lose a little bit of veneer, and staining is going to be a pain. So what I recommend is just do the 120 and then go into the 220, and it'll be more than enough to create a nice, solid, smooth surface. When it came to the finishing part of the cabinet, I wanted something that would kind of allow for oak to do what oak does without kind of manipulating to be yellow too much. So the best product for me was the tung oil. I went down to my local Home Depot and I picked it up. It was like $9 for the small little can. The directions say it applied to a lint-free rag and just start wiping it in like a wax. And it was true. It was so easy to work with. It kind of popped out the color from oak, but then once it dried, it lightened up a little bit, which is exactly the way I wanted to look. My wife loved it, I loved it, and it was just super easy to apply. I feel like it was a perfect solution. Now, when it came to building the shelves, I used some of the scrap wood, and I wanted to make sure they're not too loose and they're more of like a tight kind of fit. So the dimensions that worked for me were 14.25 by 15.5. Now, the 14.25 is a little bit shy. It's not as perfectly fit, and the reason why was, well, you know how I told you the plywood has the exposed plywood kind of edges, and you can use the edge bander and kind of iron that stuff on, but I kind of wanted to work with what I got that would match the best. So I just cut some of the trim off to be about 1/4 inches, and then it's 3/4 inches thick anyways, and then I just glued it on and used some masking tape to hold it down, and it worked so perfect. And then sanded again, took it through the ringer, 120 grit, 220, finished it off, made sure the edges were flush, and then it sat perfectly. And the shelves actually look like they were born there because they're made of the same material. So I picked up this jig a couple of years ago, and it came with this little yellow plate and this Forstner bit, and it's specifically marketed to install hinges on doors. Now, though it's a very convenient jig and I use it all the time, you can make one yourself. Just kind of create your own spacings based off the door you already have in your cabinet, and then just cut it out, and voila, from now on that's your jig. And, use a Forstner bit, and to be honest with you, the majority of the hinges that I've used, the diameter was 1 3/8 inches. So pick one out at your local Home Depot for like $15 or so, and voila, you have your own jig. Once I installed the hinges the way they should be, I started realizing that the type of hinges I bought were kind of for like a different application. They're for the cabinets that don't have a face trim to it, or a face frame. So instead of going and returning them and buying different ones, I just decided to save me a trip. So I just put a piece of scrap wood, glued it in, screwed it in, and then just moved the hinges a little bit out of the way. This is something I'm dealing with. It worked just great. It's just an extra step. So moral of the story, be mindful of the type of hinges you're buying.
Well, that is it for me this week. Thank you so much, guys, for taking your time and watching one of my videos. If you're brand new to the channel and you like these style of videos, I encourage you guys to hit that subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. And if you want to be notified when I put a new video out, which is every week, hit that notification bell and you'll be alerted every single time. Catch me on social media. All the links will be down in the description below. Tune in out this week. We'll see you guys next week. See ya. Bye.